Welcome to today's webinar called Social Emergency Response, Supporting Communities Through Collective Grief and Loss. This is the second webinar in a series hosted by the Community Wellness and Protection. We are so delighted that you could join us today to hear about the emerging work of the Canadian Red Cross in the area of social emergency. My name is Elaine Caswell, and I will be one of your hosts today. My role within the Canadian Red Cross is that I am the Senior Advisor for Social Emergency Response. I was thinking this morning about one of the things that I'm really proud about in the Canadian Red Cross from my time being involved is the significant shift that the Canadian Red Cross has had from just providing physical support for our beneficiaries to really making an impact in providing psychosocial support and really gaining momentum to support people in a holistic way. So I'm very excited that I have been part of the Canadian Red Cross in that transition. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Regina, Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our co-host for today is Gabe Thirlwall. Gabe has been a member of our social emergency team for the last couple of years, and I am delighted that she is co-host today because she has been on response a number of times. Gabe, can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, so my name is Gabe Thirlwall, and I'm on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory just outside Ottawa, Ontario. And I am happy to join you for this presentation to tell you about our social emergency project.
Thanks, Gabe. Before we engage with the content today, I would really encourage all of our participants to introduce yourself in the chat and share a land acknowledgement for the community in which you live. Would really love to know where you're coming from today. I'm sure that people are responding in the chat, although I can't see them at this time. Somebody could help me out.
They're coming in. So we have someone from Mi'kmaq territory, somebody from Lil'wat, unceded territory of the Lil'wat Nation. They're slowly coming in. Someone from Brandon, which is Treaty 2. Someone in Ontario who is
Thanks,
from, yeah, so. Lisa is here from Mohawk territory, someone from Calgary, Treaty 7.
So thank you for those who have given their land acknowledgement and introduced themselves today. And I would encourage you to continue to do that while we work through our presentation today. So exciting to see people from across the nation. Before you see our agenda for today, and our agenda really is about a time for us to create awareness of the work that the Canadian Red Cross is doing in social emergency. So this really helps us understand where the Canadian Red Cross and community are working together. So today we're going to share a definition of what a social emergency is. We're going to briefly describe the evolution of response within the Canadian Red Cross. We'll talk about the Red Cross model of social emergency response that has been developed over a course of number of years. We'll give you some time for questions and answers. And prior to beginning right now, we're just going to do some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with participants, so you can expect that in your email soon. We'd ask you to keep your mics on mute, and that just reduces some of the background noise. If you could save your questions until the end of that end of our presentation, that is very helpful. And at that time, you can either come off of mute or you can write your questions in the chat. We'll try to respond them all. And we want to say today that please be aware that the presentation does reference suicide, so please take care of yourself. So we're going to start with the basics. We're going to start with what is a social emergency? So I'm going to read the definition. A social emergency is an event or situation, with the exception of natural disasters requiring community evacuation, that exceeds the resources and capacities of a community and requires the immediate response and support of external agencies and service providers. This definition wasn't created by the Canadian Red Cross. This definition was created in 2017 at the Northern Ontario Social Emergency Summit between the First Nations leadership in Ontario and representatives from the Government of Ontario and the Government of Canada. Silence. Cries of pain and suffering. Momentary loss of control, anger and frustration. We are aware that events such as youth suicide or cumulative deaths, such as those created by social emergency response, disrupt lives, often making communities feel overwhelmed and unprepared. More than ever before, communities are feeling and sharing about the psychological impacts of tragedies within their community. I think it's such a pivotal moment in our history that we talk about psychological well-being as well as physical well-being. That's been the focus of responses for a long time. Communities are reaching out for help. Research shows that early psychosocial support is one way to prevent the onset of mental health illness. So today we really want to share how the Canadian Red Cross is developing supports to support community recovery. Again, we want to acknowledge that there is hope as we utilize psychological first aid and psychosocial support to help people recover from a crisis that has disrupted their lives. The Red Cross works and plans with community to provide psychosocial services that are culturally appropriate and driven by the community. We collectively work towards decreasing physical and psychological risks for communities to respond. We leverage local resources to aid in sustainable resources to help the community to cope and recover. We do not duplicate services, and this is not about the Canadian Red Cross coming into a community, parachuting into community and doing work in isolation of community. We're excited to share this video clip with you, provided by a principal in Nunavut, who shares a snapshot of the need and the impact of the Red Cross social emergency services when activated.
To whom it may concern, I am writing to express my heartfelt appreciation for the valuable support and assistance that the Canadian Red Cross has provided to our community here in Nunavut, particularly within our educational institutions. As a principal in Nunavut, I have witnessed firsthand the positive impact of the Red Cross's dedicated efforts during times of crisis. Nunavut, as you are well aware, grapples with social issues and a suicide rate that is significantly higher than the rest of Canada. Our community faces these challenges with limited resources and a profound need for support. It is during these difficult times that the Canadian Red Cross has proven to be a dependable source of assistance. The Red Cross's prompt response to crises, such as the sudden death or suicide of a student, has been commendable. The establishment of a monetary contribution for affected families to address immediate needs like food has provided critical relief during their difficult moments. Additionally, the virtual support offered to our staff as we navigate these challenging situations has been helpful in ensuring that our educators can cope and support our students effectively. One of the noteworthy initiatives that the Canadian Red Cross has undertaken is the provision of supporting documents, curriculum, and lesson plans for teachers. These resources have helped us to help our students process traumatic events in a constructive manner, assisting in their emotional recovery and fostering resilience and emotional well-being. Furthermore, I would like to extend my gratitude for the training provided by Chris and Gabe from the Red Cross, who visited our community in the fall to deliver trauma-informed care to the staff of both schools. The insights gained during this training were instrumental in equipping our staff with the necessary skills to navigate sensitive situations and support our students effectively. Their visit had a positive impact on our educators, and we are appreciative of their commitment to our community's well-being. In conclusion, the Canadian Red Cross has consistently demonstrated itself as a valuable asset during times of crisis. Your support and dedication have made a positive difference in the lives of our students, their families, and our staff. I hope that the Canadian Red Cross can continue its important work in our communities for years to come, providing the essential assistance that Nunavut so urgently requires. Thank you for your service and commitment to our community. Sincerely, Principal in Nunavut. To whom it may.
That recording just really brings tears to my eyes. And as I look at that recording and look at the number of youth that the Canadian Red Cross has impacted, along with other leadership within the within Nunavut, I want to acknowledge that work. So this slide before you right now looks at a timeline that the Canadian Red Cross has been involved with the development of a social emergency response service line. So we've been involved formally and informally with social emergency services since around 2015. And that response started in Nunavut in Ontario, and sadly, both were related to youth deaths by suicide. The response in Nunavut, that one of our colleagues who's no longer with the Red Cross really talks about the time when she was in community delivering respect education material with a group of teachers, and there was a suicide death that occurred in the first evening of the workshop. And the workshop the following day was postponed, and the community came together, and there was an emphasis on helping, supporting, connecting by those social networks, providing psychosocial kind of activities and support to help that grieving and that loss process, as well as the way to recovery. So as I've said before, each social emergency response that you see on this timeline was activated by community. So the Canadian Red Cross did not go out seeking or saying that we had a service line to support. Each response is very unique, as you're going to hear about. They had different reasons for those responses. And each of the responses, there's a total component to begin the response on community strengths and where community feels that the gaps in their needs and resources are, and what their capabilities are to respond. And I think that is so supportive of our work within community, as we give community that right of leadership and that right of way to inform us how we can connect and build on what they need. And each response has an educational component that speaks to and focuses on recovery. I'm happy to say that today we've moved that dial. Today we have a roster of national responders who, when activated by community, respond virtually within 24 hours to begin assessing the impact and capacity of a community to recover following loss. Our responses are tailored and flexible to the needs of the community and utilize a public health approach. Based on lessons learned, and that's including during COVID when we had to pivot to virtual responses only, the Canadian Red Cross is slowly moving forward to create a national strategy for responding to social emergencies when activated. This timeline, as I indicated, shows responses to different situations. Some of the situations that we have responded to are suicides. For over a year, there was a suicide response to a northern community in Saskatchewan, where there was a suicide pact of young youth from the age of 9 to 14 years old, and over 10 lives were lost in that suicide cluster. We've responded to suicide or to shootings in La Loche in Saskatchewan, responded to water crises, opioid crisis, homicides and related suicides, school fires, cumulative deaths where loss of elders and community members made a major impact on community, arson of a northern store, and deaths related to drowning, boating accidents, on land accidents that have made a major impact on community. I would like to share an interview now with you from Jody from the government of Nunavut. For a decade, the Canadian Red Cross has worked in partnership with the Department of Education, government of Nunavut, to support schools and the broader community during social emergencies. Jody's role is the Counseling Development Coordinator with the Department of Education. And as I say, it's important to note that the Canadian Red Cross has responded virtually and in person, and will continue to develop that model of response. So we asked Jody some questions, and we're going to hear her answer to the first question. Jody, why and when was the partnership developed with the Red Cross?
So that partnership between the government of Nunavut and the Canadian Red Cross has been collaboratively built over a course of a number of years. Could you please share when and why that partnership was developed?
So I was not around. Yes, I will try to share. I was not around for the initial partnership, but I can speak a little bit to it and then talk a little bit about how it evolved into the crisis response social emergency support that the Red Cross provides. So my understanding is that through a suicide inquest in Nunavut, and an action plan was developed. And part of that action plan actually was identifying the needs for some more supports around bullying and other resource development. And the Canadian Red Cross worked with the Department of Education around the Respect Education program, which also included training. It evolved a little bit over the time, and Canadian Red Cross being a great partner in that we're able to be responsive to kind of our needs. And some of that evolved in the sense that we had school communities that were struggling or kind of had experienced a loss or destabilizing crisis. And we needed to be able to respond quickly and supportively, both in the training and resources and just support available. And so kind of building on the partnership we had with the Canadian Red Cross, this evolved into not just training and resources, but into some response and support, knowing that the Canadian Red Cross has that very broad experience and internationally as well, obviously. So we drew on them and it kind of evolved. And so we still have the training components, but we also have this crisis response and social emergency response. Yeah, and so it evolved, and I think that started in 2017 was the first social emergency or crisis responses.
So that partnership between Yeah, time flies. In thinking of social emergencies and these services, can you describe a particular incident where the Canadian Red Cross's social emergency response services significantly impacted a school community in Nunavut?
So I can think of quite a few of those, and they are all a little bit unique. So I've been coordinating this since 2018, and I think there's been over 80 responses. I'd have to look back at the exact number since then. And so when I was thinking about a specific social emergency, it's hard not to pick out one. And so I will highlight one that maybe helps illustrate how the impact has been significant in a school community. So in the community, one of the recent social emergency was that a school staff person, so we call them student support teachers, a very significant support teacher died. And so it caused a great deal of disruption into the school community. It was an unexpected loss, and having been a big part of the community, both in terms of support for students and the community itself, and very connected, this was a situation where the Canadian Red Cross responded in a way that not just supported the school leader who was, trying to kind of get the loss of a key person in a school staff that also played a role of supporting students impacted the school greatly. And so the Canadian Red Cross was able to provide a great deal of support to that school leader who was also impacted, was able to offer check-ins and help navigate ensuring that the students were also supported. It was also both a virtual and an in-person response. It worked with other partners that we have to coordinate, and it also actually really assisted with, the Red Cross assisted with what we have, the regional school operations, the staff kind of that oversees schools in that region, who the superintendent went into the community and also supported her, who was acting on that role at that time, in terms of what does it look like, in real time, very quickly. What are things we need to put in place? What are priorities? And then the follow-up and kind of ongoing piece. So that was an example that I thought of kind of recently, but a particular incident. Although there's many others to pick from, to be honest, and they all are a bit unique and different.
In your view or your opinion, what are the most valuable benefits that the Canadian Red Cross's social emergency response services brings to these schools and communities in Nunavut?
So I think they have a fair number of, or a fair amount of expertise and knowledge in this area. I think that they are able to be responsive. So the responders are just that, responsive. They work collaboratively with the school community in a way during a very crisis or destabilizing situations that is a challenge, and they're incredibly resourceful. And so navigating the realities of being in remote communities, technology challenges. For example, in COVID, we shifted very quickly, not canceling crisis response, but we moved to virtual. We figured out, how that might look and how that could work in the realities of travel restrictions and things like that. I think that those are all kind of aspects or qualities of crisis response that Red Cross does very well. It is very important to us to be able to have that time and dedicated folks that have that expertise and can be so responsive and flexible and to move with the different realities and needs of the different communities.
I'd like to thank Becky Han, one of our team members, and Jody for gathering those comments from our partnership with the government of Nunavut. Our work in social emergency response is certainly being driven by some of our actions coming out and lessons learned from Nunavut. So as you've heard from Jody, the activation of services from the Canadian Red Cross does play a significant role within community. I'm really proud to, to hear again Jody talking about that the Canadian Red Cross complements services and supports are what's needed within the community. And I'm humbled as well that communities invite us in to be part of that response team and to be part of improving the well-being and safety for youth. Sadly, this here slide talks about the causes of our activation within Nunavut over a 4-year period. This data is data that really resonates with us about the importance of our work as well as the importance of the data to help us focus on prevention work as well as preparedness. Youth lives matter, and the way that we respond matters. You see that suicide is #1 in our response in Nunavut. Research shows that suicide, and you've heard this before in the recording, has a significant public health issue for decades around suicide. The rates of suicide for youth in Nunavut is the highest in the world. The World Health Organization estimates that up to 135 people are impacted through every suicide. This came to my attention this week as I was thinking about our work in community. Imagine the number of people that have been impacted by suicide in one of the remote communities that we have worked, with a population of about 1,200 people, where there have been 10 suicides over the last 2 years. Sadly, there aren't enough mental health counselors to go around and to deal with all the grief and to provide service. So as we look at providing psychosocial support to help people in recovery, I think it's critical to get that piece right and to understand how we can increase those services and supports from a bottom-up approach. You will also note the other tragedies that cause grief and loss within a community. I do want to identify maybe a common theme of each of these, and it's about no violence against children and youth is justifiable, and all violence against children and youth is preventable. It is the Red Cross mission to improve the lives of people living with vulnerabilities by mobilizing the power of humanity. Also, we know that there are many factors contributing to why community crises occur, and we'll talk briefly about that later. We are also aware we're still in a paradigm where communities have to declare a state of emergency or request to declare a state of emergency in order to gain supports that they need when the community is feeling overwhelmed. Our experience has taught us that there are many factors that contribute to community loss and grief. We recognize that social emergencies, sadly, are more common in First Nations and Inuit communities due to historical trauma, economic challenges, and systemic injustice. In addition, colonization has weakened tradition and community ties, damaging the social fabric of the community. In most remote communities, there's limited access to vital services, worsening issues like poverty and inadequate housing. We also recognize that past trauma and ongoing racism has impacted community, keeping them marginalized. Distances from major cities also tends to make it harder for a community to have a range of services that are required. All these factors can lead to increased violence and abuse, and communities can find themselves ill-prepared to respond and recover to social emergency. Collectively, we must find a way to work with communities to increase safer communities. I'm going to turn it over to Gabe now.
Hello, thank you, Elaine. So a key component of social emergency response is that they are led by community. So our support is activated through the community leadership. Sometimes that will be a school principal. Sometimes it would be an elected chief. And the CRC does have some provincial and territorial agreements, such as the agreement with the Government of Nunavut Department of Education to respond to social emergencies. But we do want to emphasize that we only respond by community invitation. So our support, the goal of social emergency response is to provide stabilization and psychosocial support. Our support falls into the 4 categories you see in front of you, which are psychosocial support, assessment and stabilization, community mobilization, and capacity building. So I'll take some time to explain what each of these mean. So psychosocial support is provided through the principles of psychological first aid, which some of you may be familiar with. And it's crucial across all stages of social emergency response. It involves creating safe environments, promoting positive social relationships, teaching coping mechanisms to provide comfort and resilience during these high stress situations. We collaborate with local service agencies, community leaders, and elders to ensure culturally appropriate supports and to see that integration of culturally appropriate supports. So what assessment means is it focuses on the impact and the capacity of a community, and it's completed in collaboration with community partners. Those would be the schools, the healthcare center, and local service agencies. We help to identify strengths and gaps and encourage collaboration between the service agencies. Community mobilization engages people and local services in the recovery process, encouraging that interagency collaboration and providing tools and resources. We build on existing community resources to identify strengths and address needs to make services sustainable. The Canadian Red Cross works alongside these community organizations to align services and reduce service gaps. And in terms of capacity building, That means supporting community-led initiatives and assisting communities to discover and build resilience. It can also include helping to prepare for future events, doing some crisis planning. Capacity building often includes education sessions for community members or school staff and students. So social emergency response is a brief intervention. The goal is to stabilize the community, help them develop the tools for recovery, and encourage resilience. So when a social emergency is activated, a trained team is assembled to respond. The team offers the following services to the community: guidance, education, and wellness support. So guidance means we offer practical, collaborative, and community-driven planning to support communities. We develop and implement crisis response plans. We advocate for community needs and provide context-specific recommendations for wellness supports. So for example, a good example of guidance is when there is a crisis in a school community, we would have a number of phone conversations with the school leadership, the principal and the vice principal, and guide them through the crisis, reminding them of their internal crisis response structures, but also providing advice on what steps to take. In terms of education, we offer workshops. So we facilitate culturally safe learning sessions that encourage supportive relationships, life promotion, and positive communication strategies. We offer these to a variety of audiences. It could be staff from a school, it could be students at a school, or it could be community members. Our workshops have included safety planning, psychological first aid, healthy youth relationships, and bullying prevention. We also often cater a workshop to a given community. They'll name the needs, and then we will design a workshop to meet those needs. So wellness support. So we'll support community members through wellness calls. So we do have a number of people that can offer wellness calls, and those are offered short-term to the community. So they're short-term wellness calls with the focus of providing that stabilization, and if needed, linking them to longer-term support. We also provide material support to community members through care packages, food hampers, and other material support. So when responding to social emergencies, the Canadian Red Cross employs several complementary evidence-informed frameworks to emphasize community-driven recovery approach. So the social emergency response model prioritizes emotional well-being during the crisis, emphasizing physical and emotional safety and psychosocial support. The emphasis is on facilitating resiliency, encouraging healthy coping mechanisms, and celebrating the way people have made it to this point in their lives. Our approach focuses on providing universal support and utilizing community referrals for specialized mental health care. We work in collaboration with community resources, promoting resilience and supporting recovery through a trauma-informed lens. Ultimately, this integrated model aims to enhance overall emotional health, stability, and well-being of community members. So we do want to talk about sort of the immediate response to crisis, so short-term and then longer term. So recovery from loss in small communities involves a multifaceted approach aimed at stabilization, rebuilding, and fostering resilience. Initially, our efforts focus on stabilizing the community by addressing immediate needs, like providing basic needs or physical and emotional safety. In order to respond to future events, comprehensive planning is essential to chart a path towards long-term recovery, including rebuilding social connection, accessing resources, and addressing mental health needs. Prevention education plays a critical role in equipping the community with the knowledge and tools to mitigate future risks and prevent similar losses. By fostering a sense of solidarity and empowering individuals with skills to navigate the challenges, the community can gradually heal and emerge stronger from adversity. So in providing a pathway to social emergency response, preparedness is the most intensive stage. So we at the Canadian Red Cross have spent years finding and developing frameworks, forms, processes, and then we've revised them, redone them, and rediscovered better ways of doing it. So our social emergency response is always changing and evolving. The more we plan and prepare, the better we are able to respond when a critical incident occurs. A part of our learning has been the high number of people who are affected in a critical incident. And by implementing support quickly afterwards, we can reduce the impact and support resiliency and wellness. However, trauma, grief, and despair are different for each person, and their healing journey will also be individual, taking weeks, months, or even years. So we do want to thank you for listening. What we're going to do now is share our one-pager about social emergencies, and that's what's on your screen. So I believe that's being dropped into the chat. If you're interested in learning more about social emergency response for your community, you can email us, and there's a tiny little email on there, and hopefully someone can drop the email into the chat. Oh, there it is. The email is right there on the slide, but it also will drop it into the chat. And what we'll do now is open the floor to questions from the audience. You can begin by leaving your questions in the chat. I'll read them out, and then Elaine and I will do our best to respond, keeping in mind that there may be questions that we don't have answers to yet.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to start our Q&A now. So if you can use the chat box to just drop your questions, we'll begin that part of the session now.
I guess I will respond to just one comment that was in the chat, that this is not a training, but more like a reporting on the experience. You're absolutely right. This was the first session on developing awareness internally and externally, the work that the Canadian Red Cross has done to develop a response to social emergencies that we are utilizing and that we're continuing to evolve.
And we do have a question in the chat. It says, how many incidents must occur before it's determined help can go to a community? So Elaine, do you want to answer that one?
Absolutely. So that goes back to the definition that we started with at the beginning of the presentation. The question is not about the number of response, but it is about community looking at their capacities and their abilities to be able to respond. So in some communities, maybe one death would activate a social emergency because of the impact of that particular situation. So it's really about communities thinking about what capabilities they do have to respond, and then identifying where the gaps in services or the needs are. The next question is about, is there a place for volunteers in these responses? So as we had indicated, that the Canadian Red Cross has been involved over a decade responding to social emergencies in Nunavut. And there have been, and there's still ongoing ways that volunteers have been historically involved in responding in Nunavut. And we're currently developing different ways for volunteers to be involved through our training pathway. So we've had the first pilot of our community engagement leads, which is the person who leads a response and done some training. We're probably not ready to open that up broader to volunteers at this time, but we also have wellness calls that we have as part of our response. And people who have a background in safety and well-being are often people who, feel very comfortable responding in that situation. So the answer to that, yes. I guess I'll say a cautionary thing is to get volunteers, the positions all have to be posted on the website. And so our job descriptions are evolving as we speak in order to align all of those back process within the Canadian Red Cross. But what I would do is encourage you to stay informed because there's going to be more coming on that real soon.
We have a few more questions, but just a reminder that there will be a feedback form for webinar participants and that is being shared with you. And so please fill it out and send it back to us. But I'm going to combine two questions. So there's one question is, how quickly can a response happen? And then the other ones are the activations with communities only communities that we have prior engagement with? Or can support come from outside, from a different community? So how quickly can a response happen? Again, the request comes from community. So if the community makes the request, usually it's within 24 hours. It's a little more complex if it's a community we don't have a prior relationship with. So getting that message to us and us responding might take a little bit longer. So does that answer those two questions fairly, Elaine?
Yeah, and I'll just give an example. We got a response from a community in Nunavut on Monday at 9 a.m. And we made contact with that community by mid-afternoon to identify what their strengths and what their needs were so we could augment their services and supports and really do give some info around stabilization of the community. So yes, there was a question earlier about finding death stats. I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that because we are in partnership with the government of Nunavut, we have access to coroner's reports that inform some of our work as well. So that isn't the way that we're usually activated, but there is that communication from interdepartmental approach.
There is a really lovely question in the chat that says, does social emergency response include social prescribing as part of the follow-up? And the answer is no, not right now, but what a great idea. Our model is constantly evolving. And because our focus is just short-term stabilization, we'll see. I think it's a great idea. And we'll see as our model evolves if that becomes part of it. So thanks for the question. Doesn't look like we have any more questions, Elaine.
I'll give people just a minute more. While you're waiting with your questions, please fill out the feedback survey. April, Gabe, do you want to answer the question on the screen?
Oh, someone was like, what does social prescribing mean? So this is, there's actually some other areas of the Red Cross who are actively doing this. So it would be working with the community to assess needs. And then in the way, like you would prescribe medication, you would prescribe social engagement. So you'd be like, you know what is needed for this adult is I don't know, fitness class twice a week, and maybe joining a reading group for that fostering social connection. It's understanding that our social lives are very important to our physical health and to our mental health. And so social prescribing is, they're using that word prescribing like we would prescribe insulin, or we would prescribe medications, but prescribing activities and social connection. And so there's some pretty innovative projects happening at the Red Cross. I went to a lovely webinar about it on some projects that are happening in Toronto with older adults. So I'm sure they're sitting somewhere. Okay. The registration information for the next webinar will be shared. So if people want to join that would be awesome. Nope, it's in the chat.
So thank you for joining us today. We're delighted that we had an opportunity to share about social emergency response, which is just one area of response, or one area that we are currently developing. We also have been focusing on preparedness as well. And as you might know, prevention education plays a huge part in the Canadian Red Cross. So thank you. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in our great nation today. Wish you health, wellness, and beauty today and in the rest of your week. So again, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.